The NLRB has to be able to act and act swiftly, and it should act swiftly even with a bias towards workers.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Justice delayed is justice denied, especially in cases like the one at Starbucks. Because working folks, we do not have, unlike the Coke-funded radio guy who had a commercial before we went on the air, who literally gets money from the Koch brothers. I mean, that's not just a generic like, oh, this guy gets money from billionaires. This guy literally, in the proper definition of the word, gets money from Koch brothers. Unlike people like that, people like you and me, because I'm just a regular worker, I do not get paid to do this. Unions and listeners sponsor the show. All of that money goes into running the show. It does not go to me. I don't take any money from this. People like you and me, we don't have the time, we don't have the money to just sit around for years, even for months, even for a month, waiting for resolution when our rights are violated. If protections of our rights to organize are to mean anything, if protections to our right to freely associate, as is given by the Constitution, to speak freely, as is given by the Constitution, are to mean anything, the remedies have to be swift. For that to happen, we need two things. We need an aggressive NLRB and a funded NLRB. Let's look at the Starbucks stores in the Buffalo area. From an article by Maxwell Parrott in Jacobin about how the delays hurt workers, the complaint details violations from at least 18 Starbucks locations out of a total of 20 in the Buffalo area. Of those, 4 stores have conclusively voted in favor of a union, 1 has voted against, and another is waiting on a contested vote count. These figures reveal that the majority of stores allegedly affected by Starbucks anti-union actions in Buffalo have not yet filed for election. How is that going to affect workers at stores without campaigns yet? From the article again, Abruzzo described how unlawful anti-union campaigns often start with intimidation and then intensify to retaliation. She wrote that to live up to the NLRB's mission of protecting worker rights, it must be able to do so at the earliest stages of organizing before any workers are terminated. Obviously. And that did not happen in Buffalo. To stop the drawn-out process from obstructing organizing efforts, Abruzzo has urged regional offices to aggressively seek injunctions which had been steadily declining for the past decade until last year. The board typically seeks injunctive relief when employers have tried to slow down union momentum, an outcome that can't necessarily be reversed through a court order. This is what Liebman described as the whole point of an injunction. Liebman is a former NLRB chair under Obama, that there isn't irreparable harm created that cannot really be remedied down the road whenever it is that the NLRB can get around to deciding the case. The NLRB has to be able to act and act swiftly, and it should act swiftly even with a bias towards workers, because let's think about just for a second, what are the ramifications if the NLRB is too loosey-goosey with enforcing our right to unionize? If the NLRB is too proactive and makes it so that workers cannot be fired for organizing in too many, like, let's say that somebody is organizing and then they actually do something wrong that would normally actually get them fired, but the NLRB protects them because they're in a union campaign. This is kind of the worst case scenario, right, that you can imagine. The worst case scenario is that an actually bad employee the employer has to keep them on the payroll for the duration of the union campaign. That is the worst case scenario. What does that actually mean? That the employer loses a small amount of profit and fires them later. What does it mean in the opposite case? Let's go the worst case scenario, which is what the status quo is. The status quo is basically the worst case scenario. And which is what? Which is that workers who are performing well, who are performing satisfactorily, are fired illegally, and 2, 3 years later, the NLRB comes out with a decision that says, yeah, you are illegally fired. The district courts agree, and your employer has to offer you reinstatement. Well, that doesn't do diddly squat for me 3 years later. I could be homeless 3 years later. I'm not going to have a job. I would have a different job 3 years later. I can't just sit around for 3 years while I wait for the government to enforce the damn law. I can't do that. I'm a worker. I live paycheck to paycheck. So I become homeless or I get a different job. And that's exactly what happens. Studies have shown that only 6% of people who are offered reinstatement as a result of violations of labor law actually take the job because they've had to get a different job and they've had to adjust their life around that job. 6%. Does that sound like law and order to you? Does that sound like our rights are being protected? No, of course not. Of course not. And they also need funding. The NLRB has had, when you account for inflation, something like a 30% cut since 2010. We have so many more workers. We have so many more people filing for election since 2010. And they have 30% fewer resources. The Birmingham NLRB office would be fully staffed at, what was it that Joseph Webb told us, the NLRB attorney that we spoke to? He said it would be fully staffed at 11 or 12 employees. Do you know how many staff they have at the NLRB region office in Birmingham? 4. They have 4 people running an entire region. 4 people for all the workers in Alabama. 4 people. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. So the Biden administration is trying to push for some more funding for the NLRB, and of course Republicans are fighting against it again. You know, look, there's a difference between the two parties. I'm not a big booster of either one, but there's a difference. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.